Hi, I'm Chris from airwindows, and for those who were asking for the very first original version of Console 5, because as you remember, I did a version of Console 5 that fixed the DC wanderings, and the original version of Console 5 that I put out on Christmas morning was permanently broken with regard to things like sawtooth waves, because if you had sudden motions and then the slew behavior was not linear, like some of it was very sharp and then some of it was very gradual, stuff got off balance. And stuff got off balance so hardcore that you developed big DC motions and stuff. Well, what we ended up with was this. But what you had on Christmas morning was this. Now that might not sound all that different, because I put a lot of work into getting Console 5, the final version, the final official version, to be good and to work. Because they did not like the idea that people had tracks that were blowing up everything, developing all this DC offset, which just stuck around, and it was just bad. People were trying to think of good ways to use the DC offset. I can even see some right now. I see that there's DC offset left on that track. And if I shut it off, I can see that around 45 or so in the level monitor here, no, 47 dB down, there's a little DC offset being left over, because this is the original Christmas morning version of Console 5. And if I run it all the way to the end, and then stop, we'll see that there is DC offset left over from this. But we have a special trick. If you do want to use this and you have no other DC filters going on, for instance, here's something that I believe I can do. I'll just throw in not DC voltage, but a nice little bass killer here. And we'll just whack all the bass completely. And if you have some kind of plugin like this, that'll fix it. But we don't necessarily want to do that. This is actually a 26 pole IR filter. It sounds okay, but it's like the whole point of Console was the intense. You probably can even hear it. I'll set it to 5 where it's nearly out, and if I go back and forth here, oh god, and it was on everything too. Here, tell you what. That did work, but let's put it only on the bus. It does demonstrate that that did work. And where we have a DC offset right there, that should still do the same thing. And what we'll find is that it sounds to me like everything got a little bit flatter when we kicked in the 26 pole DC filter. It's not doing a lot, and it is successfully stopping that from being the case. If I turn it off, I get the DC voltage back. But it feels as if that does a little bit to the tone. So what I've included, rather than having to go into something like this and big, and then a little tiny bit flatter. I could do this. See, this was part of the first fix for the DC problems. And this is part of the first fix where people complained and went, oh, but it's doing stuff. I don't like the fact that it's taking away the DC offset, but now it sounds like I lost all my bass. Well, if you're worried about bass and stuff that much, you should probably be using C5RawConsole instead, because this is sort of the tone texture type one. But that said, bass, less bass, and then somewhere in the middle. You can pretty much set that down low enough to where you're not going to lose any bass, but it still will get rid of the DC offset. And funnily enough, tell you what, I'm going to demonstrate how slowly it can get rid of the DC offset. If you really wanted to do this and your waveforms don't generate that much DC, you can just use a bunch of these and then sneak a tiny little bit back. And I'm going to show you how that works. First of all, here we go again with this. And there we are with some DC. It's not in both channels this time, but we can plainly see it is 48 dB down. I'm going to hold down Option, which Logic lets you do tiny, tiny adjustments if you hold down Options, as you see on the screen, because it'll show you. And I'm going to go to 0.001. Now, technically, that'll make this start going away eventually. It's doing it very slowly, though. So we'll try 0.01. I've set this up so that the subtler areas of it really are barely touching the bass at all. This is not bass killing force. You have to throw it way up there to start really eating the bass up very much. And as we can see, at these low settings, it's still kind of hanging. It'll work eventually. And as you can see it's starting to work. Now it's at 50. And we'll scooch it up a little bit longer, and we'll start to see it going down. And that's as slow as the DC will go away at this very subtle centering force setting. Now that's a low frequency roll-off of like 0.000001 hertz. That's not going to eat your bass, and you can hear it's still basically there. No difference. But then we'll set up a little more DC offset again. We'll set it down there. It's actually lower than it was last time. We'll go to the middle and see how fast it goes away. Yep. And it's gone. So middle settings, and that goes for channels as well as bus. You don't necessarily want to have the channels developing DC just because the bus will do it. It'll kind of screw them up a little bit. You might want to have, I have it defaulting to the Christmas morning full DC version because people wanted that. But if you set these pretty much to just the middle, it ought to work pretty well as far as being able to still retain the deepness without that without the thickness of using a 26-pole filter. The DC offsets will just kind of sneak away if they get incurred. Now this is still not the plugin set that you want to use for like fancy synthetic stuff or or virtual instruments, or virtual instruments doing variations on sawtooth waves, all the kinds of stuff that will just make the DC blow up. You probably don't want to be using this for that. But if you're using stuff that's mostly well behaved, and the waveforms are like recorded with microphones, and they're not too out of line, then you probably can get away with using the C5RawConsole, console raw, whatever it is that I called it. You will see it plainly when I post it. It'll come up in the menus as C5RawBus and C5RawConsole. And if you're looking for that very original version, and again, I can show you this versus the other ones. Just by going over there. Then this is RawConsole. Whereas this is the final console. So I think what I settled on with Console 5, the final version, is very workable and it does not suffer from the same problems. But if you really want that very original version, which is the rawest, purest, least processing version, I'll give it that. Here you are. C5 Raw channel, C5 Raw bus. Now use it wisely, because it will still give you problems if you have everything set to 0 like this. Like this. The centering force is 0 and everything. You've got literally the one that came out on Christmas morning. But you might want to be careful about how you use that. But if you use the centering force a little bit on all of them, you're probably okay as long as you're not doing unduly synthetic tones. And, you know, it's nice to have choices. So, there you are. Now, this is another Patreon-supported airwindows plugin. It's audio unit and Mac, Windows, Linux, VST. And if I need to port to other things, it's probably going to be VCV-RAC, but I'll see how convenient that is. I know there's another Linux format. I like the fact that what I've put out is the VST Linux, and it's supported in a lot of stuff, so seriously. Everything that I've open sourced is certainly available for people to port to LV2 if they'd like. I don't know how to program LV2 yet, and I don't think it would be just a recompile. So, unless somebody wants to do a clever script. If you do a clever script, I'll run it in everything that I got. But failing in the absence of a clever script, I hope you enjoy this new variation of console. This sort of earliest variation of Console 5. Because it did have a little bit of magic to it. And it's nice to be able to step back and go, hi, hello. Oh, also there is a cute little detail, which is if you had your channels and stuff in a Console 5 thing, and many of them are really well behaved, but then like some of them had the, I don't know, sawtooth waves and stuff like that. What you could do is either just use purest console channel for that one, or sneak a little centering force or a lot of centering force on that particular channel so that other stuff that does have big bass and giant size can get away with it easier. You can dial in the centering force on all these raw C5 variations and come out with a mix that has all of the enormous subsonic hugeness you could possibly ever want that still behaves and controls the stuff that needs to be controlled. Because the centering force is the way to do that. Like below about 0.5, you're kind of not going to hear it no matter what it does. Above, you can start actually using it as a low frequency roll off. And below that, you know, the DC is just going to slowly wander back to where it's supposed to be. And it might take a really long time. It's a very, very ultra mega super logarithmic taper on this. So anything below about 1/4 is just about not there. And of course 0 is literally not there because that's what people wanted to have back. Go figure. I hope you enjoy this new variation on Console 5. It is, of course, compatible with all the other Console 5 variations. And I hope you like it. Thanks.